Good day to you all, and greetings for Tell Me More. I'm Father Charleston, and I want to say just a little bit more about my homily on Sunday, and the date was the Transfiguration. We were observing the Transfiguration of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's in all the synoptic Gospels. You know those are the ones Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not counting John. And I want to read it just because it's brief, and I want to read it now. So I'm going to read it from Luke, and it is found in Luke chapter 9. So here we go. Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter, James, and John, and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his countenance was altered, and his raiment became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men talked with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory, and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they wakened they saw his glory, and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is well that we are here. Let us make 3 booths, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. As he said this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my Son, my chosen, whom I love. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. That's the story of the Transfiguration, and it's basically the same in the synoptics with 1 or 2 changes in the words. And when I was looking at tackling this topic in sermon form, I got a little afraid because most of the sermons, and my experience thus far, most of the time that we're dealing with the Transfiguration, it's hopelessly cerebral, almost boringly theological. Just go back and tell me how many life-changing, transformational, transfiguring sermons have you heard on the topic of the Transfiguration, and you'll say exactly none. Because it's almost impossible for the armchair theologian in me not to give you all of this theological gobbledygook of what the church fathers say the Transfiguration means. And so I, on purpose, chose not to go with a theological slant in my homily. I wanted something very practical. I wanted something that would be life-changing, because the whole meaning of transfigure in Greek is metamorphosis is the word there in Greek, so it's a change. I wanted something that might change my heart. And so I read it probably 8 or 10 times, and just tell you the truth here, a little inside baseball, sometimes the Spirit speaks, and sometimes he is silent. And so for many, many days, as I prayed, what would the Lord have me say about the Transfiguration? I read it again, and it had actually been on a day when someone was kind of mean to me, and it hurt my feelings. And I read in there how the Father said of his Son and to his Son, This is my Son, I love him. And the person who spoke to me that day was someone I respect, and what they told me was not that they loved me or they were proud of me. And it really hurt my feelings. You know the old lie about sticks and stones can break my bones and words can never hurt me. That is that's a complete falsehood. And so I was hurt. And when I read those words, I went, wow, how life-giving would those words, or some sort of affirmation, but not a light, bless your heart affirmation, but a real act of relentless kindness, how that might change me. And I heard those words, the Father speaking of the Son, and I said, okay, that's great, that's Jesus, he's perfect, so of course we can cheerlead for him. But how might that be directed at me? How does God feel about me? So that's really, it led me to that question. How does God really feel about me? And since God said, listen to this guy, his Son, just after he said, I love him and I'm pleased with him, he's my chosen one, what did Jesus say? And so this led me on this search, and I found out that God in the Gospels only speaks really 3 times audibly from the cloud or from heaven. He speaks the baptism of Jesus, where he says basically the same thing at the Transfiguration, and then he speaks just before the crucifixion. And so I think it's important that 2 of the 3 times he said the same thing. And he says, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him, my chosen." And then I thought, well, if I want to know how God feels about me, if you've ever asked how God feels about humanity, all you have to do is look at God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. And he came not to condemn the world, but to save the world. And I had been condemned the day that this all sort of came in my head. And I thought, well, the absolute antithesis of condemnation is undeserved love. Or sometimes we talk about one-way love, or as St. John says, not that we love him, but we love because he first loved us. And the great news of the gospel that God's love does not wait on me to get my act together to start loving me. And I said, well, how is this all going to come out in a sermonic form? And when I looked and the Father says, listen to Jesus, I said, well, what did Jesus say? Did he say, you're a buffoon? You've blown it this time. This is the 16th time we've had this conversation. I'm getting tired of this. That's not at all what he said. He said, come unto me, all ye who travail and are heavy laden, and I will refresh you. For God so loved the world. Not that God was so judgmental of the world and blew it up like in Independence Day when the White House explodes. That's not at all what Jesus said. And Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. It's light. My burden is light. And that God was so generous that he loved, that he gave his son, Jesus. Or St. Paul, and I didn't mention this in the homily, but it would work just fine. If you want to know how God feels about you, you of course look to Jesus. And if you want to know how Jesus feels about you, it's quite simple, as St. Paul says to the church in Rome, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, died for you, and died for me, and rose again. And so this led me to sort of the ultimate conclusion of how does God feel about me? Well, he loves me. And that love, in fact, engenders love, not the other way around. And by which I mean judgment doesn't engender love. Judgment kills all relationships all the time. And I find that listening to Jesus is truly transfiguring. It's transformational because I can actually feel my shoulders just lightening through that relentless kindness. And I wanted to sort of drive that home in a personal way. That's what was going on in that homily, where God tells us, yes, you can trust, you can anchor your entire life. You can take the part of your heart that is most ashamed or most embarrassed or most hurt or has the biggest grudge, and right on that spot, you can anchor that completely to the work of Jesus Christ, even though you're not in tip-top shape. And we call that in the gospel grace, or undeserved love, or undeserved kindness. And it's the only thing that has lasting transformational power for a complete reset of your life, a refocus for my life. And so thanks for letting me sort of hash out what was going on in my head as I tried to not go too theological on the Transfiguration, but somewhat practical and hopefully a word of comfort, a great word of unburdening. God bless you.